Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
It is 6:07 this Thursday morning, 15th day of May. My gosh, how did it get to be the middle of May already? Amazing how that works. Coming up at 7:05, Hans von Spakovsky will give us a preview of today's Supreme Court hearing on birthright citizenship. This could be a historic day, ladies and gentlemen. 7:35, Representative Troy Nehls of Texas talk about National Police Week. 8:05 brings us our friend K.T. McFarland to give us a summary of President Trump's trip to the Middle East. And then at 8:35, Lisa Terry of National Police Week. It's Larry O'Connor with Mercedes Schlapp. Good morning, Mercedes.
Good morning, Larry.
I think everybody knows the Tulsi Gabbard's sort of debut as a former Democrat, maybe even kind of conservative in certain respects, Republican.
Her
was
party
at CPAC.
pissed her off, so there you go.
Right.
Yes,
right. The
she was at
Democrats
CPAC.
forced her out because she dared to challenge Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris for the nomination as president, and she actually talked about foreign policy and other issues and the size of the government in a way different than many Democrats were would welcome. They called her a Russian spy. Hillary called her a Russian asset.
That's right. That's right. And I think she had it, and she really felt that she was betrayed by her own party, and she ended up becoming an independent. But then at the same time, I remember meeting her at the green room at Fox, and this was when Trump was in office, and I said, "Have you ever met President Trump?" And Tulsi told me, "No, I've never met him." And I was like, Tulsi, if you meet him, you're going to really like him. Because I always felt she could have a role in the administration. And he really stood in line with her where she felt the Democrat Party should have been on foreign policy, from kind of we don't need to be entangled in all these wars out, across the globe. And it's interesting to watch that relationship evolve. And then eventually she gets picked as the D&I director.
But I don't want to bury the lead here. Her debut in the conservative stratosphere was at the CPAC in Orlando when she gave the keynote address at the Reagan dinner. I remember it vividly that night. I remember so much about that night. And that was also the night when I came on stage wearing 20 Anthony Fauci masks. If you remember.
That was epic, to be honest.
It was a fun night.
Yes,
and now she's the director of national intelligence, and because the intelligence community was used as a weapon against her to suggest through anonymous leaks to the media that she was an asset of Vladimir Putin or Bashar al-Assad in Syria and that she was working with our enemies. This is a woman who was an active duty officer in the United States Army Reserves, with a top secret clearance, but they all said that she was, it was the most despicable lie that you could say about somebody. Obviously, if she was a Russian asset, the U.S. Army would have expelled her from the ranks. They would have brought her up on charges. But not only was she a member of the House of Representatives, but she was an active duty officer in the United States Army. It was just patently false, but it didn't stop the Democrats and the media from continuing to repeat it and slander her. Now she's in charge of our national intelligence apparatus, and her latest move really tells you the rot that was in that institution. She has now fired top members of the National Intelligence Council. She says that they had been part of the plan to weaponize the office and weaponize intelligence against American citizens. Gabbard removed the acting head of the council, Mike Collins, as well as his deputy, Maria Langen-Reichoff. As described in The Hill, it's a big shift at the entity, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, as part of the analytic arm of the intelligence community, with tasks including coordinating with policymakers. In other words, when those letters signed by multiple numbers of the intelligence community get distributed or maybe delivered anonymously to people in the media, it's these guys who do that. They gather intelligence. They've got intelligence on everybody. And if they want to characterize someone in a certain way, they can do that, and they carry the weight of that office with them. And it has been a weapon.
So, for example, in the case of Collins, was associated with this Michael Morrell, a former deputy director of the CIA, who was among the former intelligence officials who signed a letter casting doubt on the discovery of Hunter Biden's laptop.
Right.
Think about that. That led to this, the whole idea of the Russian disinformation campaign to save Joe Biden. So very politically charged. This is, look, we knew that the deep state, they were trying to survive. They're not going to survive under this administration. There's an urgent need to dig deep and figure out who is doing what and how they have manipulated and how they have targeted, the Trump officials and really tried to help the other side. I mean, you would think in these jobs, it would be about just doing the right thing when it comes to intelligence.
And protecting us from foreign enemies. But we Americans don't like to be spied on, okay? We Americans don't like our privacy invaded. We Americans don't like to be seen as the enemy by our own government. And so we've been historically reluctant to give too much power to the government to give them tools to do this. After 9/11, they said, we need these tools to protect our country from foreign enemies. And we said, okay, fine, but don't abuse it. Don't use it against us. And within, 20 years now, they've used it against us. That's where we are now. You remember the letter, the after the 2016 Trump campaign, remember they constantly repeated, 17 intelligence agencies have said that Trump colluded with the Russians. 17 intelligence. They kept saying 17. It's this office. It was the Office of DNI at that time under James Clapper. And who was the director of the CIA? John Brennan. John Brennan was on MSNBC yesterday to comment on this latest move by Tulsi Gabbard. Here's what he said.
Fired today by Tulsi Gabbard, Director Brennan.
Yeah, this whole thing just makes me livid. It's appalling and outrageous and demonstrates why Tulsi Gabbard never should have been confirmed as Director of National Intelligence. Michael Collins and Marie Langen-Rykoff are two of the most experienced, accomplished, and talented analysts in the entire U.S. intelligence community. With over 60 years of combined experience, they have worked for successive administrations since the 1990s. They have demonstrated time and time again their capabilities, their competence, their integrity.
Well, first of all, John Brennan's angry. It's got to be a good thing, number one. Number two, if they in any way were involved in that infamous memo that said the Hunter Biden laptop story was a product of Russian intelligence, or if they didn't step up in their such skilled and experienced positions, if they didn't step up and say, wait a second, that's not true, that's not right, if they didn't do that, they are the problem, and they should have been fired. So good for them.
Yeah, I absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is about ending the politicalization of intel. I think that's the big message there. And as she said, Tulsi Gabbard, end this Biden-era domestic terrorism policy, going after Trump and going after political appointees. Shouldn't happen.
And American citizens. Don't forget, we told you 2 days ago, she released a memo that showed that the Biden administration empowered the FBI to create criminal investigations on innocent American citizens because of their non-criminal activities. Think about that for a minute. The FBI was investigating American citizens over their non-criminal activity. It was actually in the memo. They used the term non-criminal activity. In other words, these people are doing something that doesn't break the law, so we want you to investigate them to find a law that they've broken. That was the world we were living under just a year ago.
WMAL, making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios. Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
You remember the horrific January 29th crash between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and that American Airlines jet coming in from Kansas, a flight. I remember talking to you, Mercedes. This is a flight that you were off and on because of Matt's family back in Kansas. Yeah. This deadly crash over the Potomac. In mid-March, the House Oversight Committee launched an investigation into that crash. And recently we have learned some information from that. As you know, the Army Black Hawk helicopter this is a different incident. Recently, an Army Black Hawk helicopter forced two jetliners to abort their landings at Reagan Airport, again, seemingly because of these flight pattern conflicts that consistently occur. Well, the Washington Post reports that the hotline connecting air traffic controllers at Reagan and the Pentagon has been inoperable since March of 2022. So let's just be clear. This is the hotline that if there was a military aircraft in the flight paths or dangerously close to the flight paths at any given time, the tower could pick up this hotline and directly connect to the Pentagon to get information about the military aircraft. It hasn't been working since 2022. What the hell was Pete Buttigieg doing as the Secretary of Transportation?
That's what I want to know. It's to me insane that no one knew that this was happening. And I think you're seeing the Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, take steps to figure out what is going on, why this hotline wasn't working. I mean, he is also figuring out why, for example, we saw another incident where an Army Black Hawk helicopter forced 2 jetliners to abort landings at DCA. I mean, we're seeing the issues at Newark Airport, which is a disaster when it comes to the staffing of the air traffic controllers. I mean, I really believe this is a huge crisis. In fact, you're starting to read that there's more people that want to drive instead of fly because they're so concerned about just the lack of staffing,
right,
the lack of modern technology in this area.
I'll tell you, I fly in and out of Reagan a lot. Like,
yes, we all do.
Multiple flights a month. So do you. And it is a unnerving feeling on takeoff and landing to sort of hold your breath and say extra prayers. I mean, air safety has been sort of something that we take for granted. And in any other city, that's how it is. But here in Washington, when you're taking off and landing at Reagan now, you're deeply concerned about exactly this sort of thing.
Exactly.
And meanwhile, again, I just want to reemphasize Pete Buttigieg is, he's grown his beard. He's walking around like he's a candidate. He did a big event in Iowa. He's criticizing the Trump administration. He's trying to position himself to run for president. And it's like, dude, you ask anybody, what has Pete Buttigieg done? And the only answer is his identity. Well, he was in the Army, or excuse me, I think he was in the Navy actually, but he's a war veteran, and he's gay.
That's
it's
it.
like,
and
okay, that doesn't tell me what he has done. What did he accomplish?
Right.
And it's nothing. He has accomplished nothing.
You remember, this was a guy who, when it was a supply chain crisis, he was on quote unquote paternity leave and nobody knew about it for months. And then he comes across trying to be this very eloquent speaker. But when it comes to the Department of Transportation, I mean, what did he accomplish? He was so busy just trying to, be somewhat of a political figure. Because I think he has set his eyes on running for president. I mean, that's all he's focused on.
He's nothing but ambition. And he's about his actual record is as thin as his beard. And that's pretty sparse.
Yeah, the beard.
It's all style and no substance. And the more we learn about what went on in just the 4 years when he was transportation secretary, this is a perfect indication. This hotline is maintained by the Defense Department. It, again, connects the Pentagon to the tower at Reagan. The FAA, under the control of Pete Buttigieg's Department of Transportation, was not aware of the line being out for the past 3 years.
Yes.
So nowhere in their protocols did they do any checks on this thing. Now, Lloyd Austin, the former Secretary of Defense, should also be blamed for this incompetence. But I got the other thing that's sort of showing what a boob Pete Buttigieg is the incredible performance by
Isn't he
Sean
chest
Duffy.
Feed? I mean, I think
yes,
he's chest
I know.
feed.
Sorry, I know. I evoked images there
you
for his
had to
paternity
put the
leave.
boob. I'm like, really?
But Secretary Duffy has been amazing. Like, every time he speaks on the record or at a congressional hearing, he sounds like he's been working in the realm of transportation his entire career. He is plugged in, he is smart, and he is willing to make very tough decisions right now that are going to cost money, but stuff that's been put off for decades that needs to get done.
Look, he's on the job 24/7, that being Sean Duffy. He understands that there's a lot. It goes back to what we're seeing overall with the Trump administration. These cabinet secretaries, all very talented, they're there to fix the problems of the past. I mean, that's really where we are, Larry. I mean, they're looking, all they're doing is saying, okay, what did the last bureaucracy do? What did the last administration do? And it's very clear that they created more problems, more havoc, did nothing to hold people accountable, did nothing to modernize the technology needed, for example, in our airports, and now we're facing the consequences.
Like the president, they were asleep at the switch. That would be the former president. And Debbie Dingell. 6:23. Coming up, the president visiting U.S. troops in Qatar will give you a wrap-up of his last 24 hours in the Middle East. Coming up next, it's O'Connor and Company with Larry and Mercy.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station. Making sense of the news. News Talk 105.9. News now. Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
It is 6:37. It's O'Connor and Company, and we're trying to get you up and going and informed and plugged in on the day's events. Yeah, we review what happened yesterday, but we're also telling you what's going to happen today. And also, frankly, in a moment, we'll tell you what's happening right now as we speak, as the president addresses U.S. troops in the Middle East. But coming up at 7:05, Hans von Spakovsky, he'll preview what's going to happen today, potentially a historic day in the Supreme Court as they hear arguments about birthright citizenship. 7:35 brings us Congressman Troy Nehls of Texas for National Police Week. 8:05, KT McFarland will give a summary of Trump's new approach to the Middle East for America. And then at 8:35, Lisa Terry on National Police Week. It's Mercedes Schlapp helping me along today. Good morning, Mercy.
Good morning, Larry.
We had fun doing the Newsmax, the Chris Plant's Right Squad show last night. Without Chris, sadly, he's taken a few days off. But how do people see those? I have a lot of friends who don't stay up so late at 10 p.m. It's like, how can I see the show?
What is it like? What is it? TV,
yeah, but if they didn't do that, I mean,
it.
does it live online? Can they get it?
That's a great question. I don't know if it lives online, but we clip a bunch of the show and we put it out there as well. So
yeah,
no, they're gonna have to what is it? TiVo it? I don't even know. Like
or DVR it.
I'm not
All
sure
right,
if it comes out or DVR it, but
I think they have on demand somewhere. Anyway, check it out. It was a fun night last night. 10 p.m. on Newsmax.
Yes, it was a blast. We had a great time.
So the president's trip to the Middle East, shockingly, I know this is going to be surprising, but I'm sure Media Research Center, the great folks there, are doing an analysis of how much news coverage there was of this fake controversy over a 747 coming from the government of Qatar versus how much the media actually covered the substantive speech and various state visits that the president has conducted while in the Middle East. This was an incredibly influential and potentially game-changing trip for the president, not just because of the trillions of dollars of investment he secured for companies like Boeing and in various other new commerce initiatives for our country, but also the way he approaches the Middle East now and trying to forge new peaceful partnerships rooted in what we do have in common. Because, listen, that's a different culture over there. And there's a lot that we don't have in common. And we learned, Mercedes, that by injecting Western democracy and democratic values on those nations under the guise of so-called nation building, it ended up in a disaster in many respects. We don't have a lot of things in common culturally when it comes to the Western values with regard to democracy, one person, one vote, and all that stuff. And I wish they were different, but they aren't. But what we do have in common is we all want to prosper. I think that yes. Trump's approach is, listen,
and
you guys are busy blowing each other up, but you could be building skyscrapers instead.
Yeah. Yes. And look, his message is very clear. He is going to work with who he can for what is basically what is going to benefit America. He made that very clear in, I believe, one of his best speeches, the speech at Saudi Arabia, where he had this message of, look at where we are, and we're going to keep growing our economy, and it's going to be about our American workers. But he understands clearly this vision of stability, prosperity, and peace. Those are the three pillars that are driving his agenda. It is why he went to these countries in Saudi Arabia and Qatar to basically send a message to the rest of the world, like, we are going to find really strong economic deals if you want to work with us, but you got to make certain concessions. For example, in talking to the Syrian president, who is controversial because he is, he's viewed as a terrorist, basically saying, look, you've got to find a way to fight ISIS and destroy them, and, sending very strong messages in that direction. Qatar's problematic too, because they've basically housed a lot of these Hamas terrorists. So that's a very tricky relationship. But he understands that we need peace and stability in the region. And in the meantime, take their money, have them invest in Boeing, have them invest in American companies. Right. That, I think, makes a lot of sense, and it's good for America.
Yeah, in fact, they announced, I think it was $200 billion contract for Boeing, Qatar buying a whole chunk of fighter jets, which is pretty impressive, and other great initiatives. Stand by with cut 7 here, because this, I think, was my favorite part of the speech, where he talked about our common values. He talked about, stop killing each other, and instead let's focus on peace and prosperity and build great civilizations. And he talked about the gleaming towers in Abu Dhabi and United Arab Emirates and Dubai and all this stuff. But then, here's the key, because you're right. I think in many respects we do have that in common. Here's the problem. Iran doesn't care about skyscrapers. They don't care about commerce. They don't care about prosperity. They don't care about living the good life. They care about killing us. They care about killing Jews, wiping Israel off the map, and they hate us. They called us the great Satan. So keeping his eyes clear, I think obviously Trump knows that too. So listen to this part of his speech where he sort of went off prompter, as he often does, and I think he sends a very clear message. Cut 7.
In recent years, far too many American presidents have been afflicted with the notion that it's our job to look into the souls of foreign leaders and use U.S. policy to dispense justice for their sins. They loved using our very powerful military, and now it's really the most powerful it's ever been. We just are getting a budget approved, $1 trillion, highest budget we've ever had in history for military, $1 trillion. And we're getting the greatest missiles, the greatest weapons. And, I hate to do it, but you have to do it because we believe in peace through strength. You have to have the strength, otherwise bad things could happen. But hopefully we'll never have to use any of those weapons. Seems to be an awfully big waste of money if you're never going to use them, but hopefully we'll never have to use them, because the destructive power of some of those weapons are like nobody's seen before. I believe it is God's job to sit in judgment, my job to defend America, and to promote the fundamental interest of stability, prosperity, and peace. That's what I really want to do.
Let's focus on peace and prosperity. By the way, I just approved a $1 trillion budget. We have the most powerful weapons on the planet. No one can stop us, and it would be a shame to turn your desert into glass if we had to.
Right. And look, there's something in understanding President Trump's mentality, too. Like, he was always against the Iraqi war. He was always against the American entanglement in these foreign conflicts. So he feels very strongly that the way you lead to prosperity, the way you lead to stability and peace is through developing these strong economic ties with these countries. Right. And it's not about just imposing the West on everybody else. It's trying to say, okay, where can we find common ground, which I think is That's a very healthy conversation to have.
And carry a big stick, as Teddy Roosevelt would say. We got Katie McFarland to discuss this as well from her perspective at 8:05. A little bit more on Trump's Middle East trip. Jesse Waters does a good job from last night recapping this trip. Oh, crud. We're just not. Let's go to cut 9 here, because we don't have enough time for all of this because we're up against it. I want to remind you we also have Katie McFarland coming up at 8:05 on this. But let's go to cut 9, Jesse Waters.
Qatar's pumping oil and sending us the money. $1.2 trillion. Not a bad thing for a day in Doha. Qatar put in the biggest order for Boeings ever. 210. That's $100 billion. But this trip isn't all about money. Trump did something no president has done in 25 years. He met with Syria's president, who used to be a bad guy, but now he's our bad guy. Trump won't inherit Biden's foreign policy. Fresh face, fresh start.
How did you find the Syrian president?
Great. I think very good. Young, attractive guy, tough guy. You know, strong pass. Very strong pass fighter.
Trump shocked the world by lifting sanctions on Syria. He says he's giving them a chance at greatness. We're trying to peel Syria away from Russia and have them play nice with Israel, and peel Syria away from Iran. The less friends Iran has in the neighborhood, the better chance they sign the nuke deal.
Yeah, and that's key here, Mercy, real fast. This is really all about Iran and making sure that those other countries who hate Iran, too, have an alternative, and that's us. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I thought we were going to break.
We were, but I wanted you to be able to jump in.
Oh, you just did one of these like breaks.
I know.
Absolutely. Look, this is about the triangulation of keeping Iran contained. So that is Saudi Arabia, who hates Iran. You do have Qatar, which is complicated, but it's also sending a message to Iran that the U.S. is willing to deal with Qatar on the economic front, and it's basically saying, okay, Iran, you have a choice. Do you want to go forward with building these nuclear weapons and killing Jews and going after Americans, or do you want to come to the table and see if we can strike a deal to make sure that this doesn't happen? We'll see how Iran responds, because they basically their regime survives on their anti-Israel, anti-America rhetoric that they share with their people.
And Obama and Biden giving them pallets of cash. That doesn't hurt
billions
either.
of dollars.
Coming up, we've been teasing it all morning. This is a big day at the Supreme Court where birthright citizenship is in the docket. Hans von Spakovsky will give us a preview next.
WMAL FM, Woodbridge, Washington.